Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are diving into a global trade war that could hit us all right in the wallet. It's March 4th, 2025, and the U.S. just put some big tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, and China.
Yeah, it's crazy because these tariffs are like a serious punch in the gut.
Yeah.
We're talking 25% on everything coming from Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, another 20% on Chinese goods.
Wow, so that affects, like, what a massive amount of stuff, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a huge chunk of change. Like, we're talking about $1.5 trillion worth of imports.
1.5 trillion, I can't even imagine that much money. It's more than some countries' entire economies, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But the thing is, this all comes after the USMCA trade deal, right? The one Trump was touting as, like, the best deal ever.
Right.
So what gives?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but it really throws a wrench into all that talk about free trade and global cooperation.
Yeah, it's a head scratcher for sure.
This move could be about boosting domestic industries.
Right.
But it also risks starting a full-blown trade war, which no one wants.
And let's be real, no one wins a trade war. So how are Canada and China responding to these tariffs?
Well, Canada isn't messing around. They hit back with their own tariffs on $107 billion worth of U.S. goods immediately.
Oh, wow.
They're not afraid to fight back.
So it's like a tit for tat, you hit me, I hit you kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
What about China? They usually play things a bit more strategically, don't they?
Yeah, you're right. China's response has been more measured. They're focusing on key agricultural products like soybeans and corn, which are big exports for the U.S.
So they're hitting us where it hurts.
Yeah, but if they're being smart about it,
Right.
it hurts the U.S., but it also limits the damage to their own economy.
Interesting.
A clever move.
So they're not going all out just yet, but I've heard they have other options, right? Like those rare earth minerals. What are those and why are they important in this whole trade war thing?
Yes, rare earth minerals. Those are crucial for making all kinds of high-tech stuff.
Yeah.
Smartphones, electric cars, military equipment.
Right.
And guess what? China controls almost all of the global supply.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, and that gives them a ton of leverage.
So if they cut off exports,
Entire industries in the U.S. and other countries could be crippled.
wow, that's like a secret weapon they're holding.
It really is.
But they're not just using that, are they? I've heard about this unreliable entities list. What's that all about?
Right, the unreliable entities list. That's basically China's way of saying, you're on the naughty list.
Ah,
If
okay.
they think a company is a threat to their national security or their economic interests, they put them on this list.
Interesting.
And then these companies face all sorts of restrictions.
So it's like a way to punish companies that don't play by their rules.
You got it.
Any companies on this list that we might recognize?
Well, one of the newest additions is Illumina, a U.S. company, a leader in DNA sequencing technology.
Oh, wow. So they're really going after cutting-edge industries.
They are. It's a bold move.
So we've got Canada firing back with tariffs, China playing a more strategic game, and then there's Mexico. What are they doing in all of this?
Mexico's a bit of a wild card right now.
Yeah.
They haven't said exactly how they'll retaliate yet, but they've promised a deliberate and impactful response.
Deliberate and impactful. That sounds a bit ominous, doesn't it? What could they do that would really make a difference? How would that affect us consumers?
Well, they could target U.S. agricultural exports just like China, or they could increase tariffs on manufactured goods, or make it harder for U.S. companies to do business in Mexico.
Right.
And any of those actions would have a big ripple effect throughout North America.
Yeah.
Probably lead to higher prices, disruptions in supply chains.
So this trade war could get messy fast.
Absolutely. It's not just about who can impose the biggest tariffs. It's about who can apply the pressure in the most strategic and most painful way.
And these consequences go way beyond just numbers on a spreadsheet, right?
You're right. This is more than just an economic issue. It's also about geopolitics. It's a power struggle with consequences for the whole world.
And that brings us to the global impact. We've talked about the US, Canada, and China, but this trade war is affecting the whole world. What are economists saying about the fallout?
Most economists agree that this trade war is a lose-lose situation for everyone.
Right.
It's creating uncertainty, disrupting supply chains, and slowing down economic growth globally.
Okay, but what does that actually mean for people like you and me?
Well, the most immediate impact will probably be higher prices. Tariffs make imported goods more expensive.
Yeah.
And eventually those costs get passed down to us consumers.
So our grocery bills might go up, or that new phone might suddenly be out of reach?
Exactly.
I've also heard economists talking about stagflation. What is that, and should we be worried?
Stagflation is basically a bad combination of slow economic growth and high inflation. And it's a tricky problem to solve because The usual ways of dealing with inflation, like raising interest rates, can actually make the economic slowdown worse.
So it's a tough situation, and all this talk about America first and winning trade wars is starting to sound a little hollow, don't you think?
It does make you wonder, can any country really isolate itself from the global economy and come out on top? We live in an interconnected world. What happens in one place affects everyone.
So if the U.S. isn't as insulated as some might think, is it possible that Europe could be the next target in this trade war?
It's possible there's a long history of trade disagreements between the U.S. and the European Union,
Oh, yeah.
steel tariffs, agricultural subsidies, all sorts of things.
Right.
And with all this protectionism going around, it wouldn't be surprising to see tensions escalate.
So it's like a domino effect. One trade war leads to another and another. Speaking of things that are a bit unnerving, let's talk about Ukraine. This adds a whole other layer of complexity to everything.
Definitely the situation in Ukraine is closely tied to the trade war and the power struggle between the U.S., China, and Russia.
And things have just escalated, haven't they? The U.S. just stopped all military aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, the timing of that move is interesting. It comes right after a tense meeting between President Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelensky.
A tense meeting. What happened there?
The details are still a bit unclear, but it seems there was a lot of disagreement over Ukraine's commitment to certain reforms the U.S. wants.
Reforms? Like what kind of reforms?
Well, the U.S. has been pushing for anti-corruption measures and judicial reforms in Ukraine.
Okay.
They see these as crucial for strengthening democracy and limiting Russian influence.
So it's not just about military aid, it's about using it as leverage.
Exactly.
But by cutting off aid, isn't the U.S. kind of undermining its own goals?
It's a gamble.
Right.
It sends a strong message,
Yeah.
but it also weakens Ukraine's defenses against Russia.
Right. It's a delicate balance. And what about Europe? They're right there on the front lines of this conflict. What are they thinking about the U.S. pulling back?
Europe is in a tough spot. They're worried about Russian aggression, and they want to support Ukraine. But they also depend on the U.S. for security and leadership.
Yeah.
This move by the U.S. is creating a lot of uncertainty for them.
So it's a test for Europe, too. And speaking of tests, let's talk about how all this turmoil is impacting the markets. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it?
The markets are definitely reflecting all the uncertainty and anxiety we've been talking about.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting developments is that the Trump trade has completely disappeared.
The Trump trade? You mean that initial stock market rally after he was elected?
Exactly. That rally is completely gone.
Wow.
The S&P 500 has lost all its gains since Trump took office, and some analysts are predicting even further declines.
So much for making the stock market great again. Which sectors are getting hit the hardest?
Tech and energy stocks are taking a beating. This trade war is disrupting global supply chains, which hurts both demand and investor confidence.
What about the U.S. dollar? Isn't that supposed to be a sign of strength and stability?
Actually, the dollar is weakening against other currencies.
Really? What does that mean for us?
A weaker dollar can be good and bad. It makes U.S. exports more competitive, but it also makes imported goods more expensive, so it can contribute to inflation.
So a mixed bag. What about the Federal Reserve? What are they doing about all of this?
The Fed is in a tricky situation. They need to balance the risks of inflation with the need to keep the economy growing.
Right.
The markets are currently expecting the Fed to cut interest rates almost 3 times, which suggests they're worried about a recession.
3 rate cuts. That's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it shows they're taking the threat of a recession very seriously.
Well, it sounds like they've got a lot on their plate. But amid all this economic uncertainty, there's one sector that seems to be doing well: defense.
Yeah, defense stocks are going up, especially in Europe.
Why is that?
Investors are anticipating higher demand for military equipment with all these global tensions.
Right.
The trade war, the conflict in Ukraine, the general feeling of instability, it's all contributing to this trend.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? That profit can be found in conflict and uncertainty.
It is.
But there's one more development we need to discuss. A big one. Saudi Aramco, the world's biggest oil company, has just cut its dividend for the first time ever.
Wow. Yeah, that's a major shock to the energy market. It's going to have a big impact on the global economy.
What's behind this surprise move?
It's a combination of things: lower oil prices, pressure on Saudi Arabia's budget, and rising global demand.
Okay.
It's a complicated situation that has implications for oil prices and energy security around the world.
So it sounds like we've got a perfect storm brewing in the energy sector.
Yeah, it's going to affect everyone. Gas prices, heating costs, everything.
It's a lot to take in, and we'll dig deeper into this in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, it really does feel like all these things are kind of piling up. Trade wars, geopolitical tensions, and now this uncertainty in the energy market. It's a lot.
It is, and it's hard to know where to even start trying to make sense of it all.
Okay.
Right. So let's jump back into this whole Aramco thing for a second. They cut their dividend, which sounds like a big deal, but I gotta be honest, I don't totally get what that means.
Right.
Can you explain it like I'm 5?
Sure. So think of a dividend as like a bonus payment that companies give to their shareholders.
Okay.
Aramco, being the biggest oil company in the world, has a lot of shareholders, and they rely on those dividends for income.
Right.
So when they cut the dividend, it's kind of a sign they're tightening their belts.
Yeah.
Maybe their profits are down or they're worried about the future.
So it's like a warning sign, a little red flag for the rest of the world. But why would a giant like Aramco need to tighten their belt? I thought oil was still a hot commodity.
You're right. Oil is still essential,
Mm-hmm.
but the market is going through some big changes. The price of oil has been all over the place, making it hard for companies to predict their revenues. And then there's this whole thing with OPEC Plus saying.
OPEC Plus, that rings a bell, but I can't quite remember what it is.
So OPEC Plus is like a club for oil-producing countries.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia, Russia, a bunch of others.
Right.
They basically get together and decide how much oil they're going to produce. And recently, they surprised everyone by deciding to increase production.
Increase production. Wouldn't that push prices down even more and hurt Aramco's profits even more?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
All right.
But there's a lot of geopolitical maneuvering going on.
Okay.
Some analysts think that Saudi Arabia, who kind of runs the show in OPEC Plus, is trying to put pressure on Russia by flooding the market with oil and driving prices down.
So it's not just about economics, it's about power and strategy. It's starting to feel like one big high-stakes poker game with the world economy on the line.
Yeah, it kind of is like that.
And like in any poker game, it's impossible to say who's going to win or lose or how much it'll cost in the end.
Right.
So while the oil tycoons are playing their games, the rest of us are just trying to figure out how to navigate this crazy world.
So let's bring it back down to earth for a minute. What does all of this mean for the average person?
Well, one thing we're probably going to see is higher prices.
Right.
Tariffs on imports plus a weaker dollar could make everything more expensive. Groceries, electronics, gas, you name it.
So we're already feeling the pinch at the grocery store and the gas pump. But what about the big picture? Are we heading for a recession? Should we be stocking up on canned goods?
It's a possibility, but it's still too early to say for sure. Recessions are complicated. They have a lot of different causes.
Okay.
The trade war is definitely a risk factor, but there are other things to consider too, like consumer confidence, business, investment, government policy.
So it's the wait and see kind of thing.
Yeah,
But it never hurts to be prepared, right?
that's true.
Maybe I'll pick up some extra pasta next time I'm at the store just in case.
Good idea. But beyond the economic impacts, there are also some bigger social and political things to think about. Like what? Give me an example.
Well, think about what rising prices do to families that are already struggling to get by,
Right.
or the potential for social unrest if people feel like the system is rigged against them.
Right.
These are issues that can really tear at the fabric of society.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Economic problems can lead to social and political problems, which then create more economic problems.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these effects aren't felt equally by everyone. Some people and some communities are way more vulnerable than others.
So this isn't just about numbers, it's about real people's lives. Which brings us back to the question of what we can do as individuals to navigate this world that's becoming more and more complex and uncertain. We can't control the global economy, but we can make choices that empower us and our communities right.
Absolutely. It starts with staying informed, being critical thinkers, and making conscious choices about how we spend our money, where we invest our time, what kind of future we want to build.
So it's about taking responsibility for our own actions, but also holding our leaders and institutions accountable.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected and that the choices we make today will have consequences for years to come.
Well said. In a world that feels increasingly divided and polarized, it's crucial to remember that we're all in this together.
And that's a powerful message to keep in mind. We've talked about a lot today, the complexities of trade wars, global energy markets, the potential for economic and social disruption. But there's also hope, the hope that comes from understanding, from connection, and from the collective will to create a more just and sustainable world. Man, it feels like the world is just constantly changing, doesn't it? Trade wars, power shifts, and the threat of conflict everywhere can be a bit much.
It can be. And it's easy to get lost in all the headlines and miss the bigger picture.
Right.
That's why it's important to step back and try to see the underlying forces at work.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's zoom out for a minute. What are the big takeaways here? What does it all mean for the average person?
Well, I think one of the most important things to remember is that we live in a truly interconnected world.
Yeah.
What happens in one country or one market can have huge ripple effects across the globe.
Right.
The trade war between the U.S. and China is a perfect example. It's affecting businesses and consumers everywhere, not just in those two countries.
So even if you live thousands of miles away from where these decisions are being made, you're still impacted.
Exactly. We're all part of this global system, whether we realize it or not.
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It can be.
So what can we do? How can we even begin to address these problems on a global scale when we can't even agree on things at a local level?
It's a big challenge for sure, but I think it starts with remembering that we're all human
Mm.
and we all want the same basic things.
Yeah,
We all want peace, prosperity, and a healthy planet.
right.
And that means we need to find ways to work together to solve these huge problems like climate change, poverty, and conflict.
So it's about looking past our differences and finding common ground.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a mindset of competition to cooperation, from a zero-sum game to a win-win scenario.
That sounds great in theory, but is it realistic? I mean, look at Ukraine. The U.S. is pulling back. Russia's getting aggressive, and Europe is caught in the middle.
You're right. The situation in Ukraine is a reminder of just how difficult this is.
Yeah.
But it also highlights how important diplomacy and dialogue are. It's important to keep working toward peaceful solutions.
So even when things look bleak, there's still hope.
Always.
Mhm.
Humans are incredibly resilient and innovative and compassionate.
Yeah,
We've faced huge challenges in the past, and we've overcome them. We can do it again.
that's good to hear. But it's going to take more than hope, right? We need action.
Of course, hope without action is meaningless,
Right.
but action without hope is just as bad. We need both the vision to imagine a better future and the courage to work toward it even when things are uncertain.
And that brings us back to the individual. What can we do to make a difference? Sometimes it feels like our actions are so small, like a drop in the ocean.
But every drop matters. Every choice we make, every action we take sends ripples out into the world.
Okay.
We may not see the impact right away, but it's there.
Yeah.
And all those individual actions can come together to create something really powerful.
So what can we do? What are some specific things?
Well, we can start by educating ourselves, staying informed, and thinking critically.
Right.
We can support organizations that are working on these issues,
Yeah.
whether it's through donations, volunteering, or just spreading awareness.
Okay, what about in our daily lives? Like the things we buy, the companies we support, how we live our lives?
Those choices matter too. We can choose to buy from ethical and sustainable companies.
Yeah.
We can reduce our impact on the environment, conserve resources, and support local businesses.
So it's about being conscious consumers, responsible citizens, and taking an active role in shaping the world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have power.
Right.
We can make a difference individually and collectively.
This deep dive has been eye-opening, for sure. We've gone deep into the complexities of trade wars, geopolitical tensions, and a globalized world.
Right.
But we've also found hope, a sense of possibility, and a renewed faith in our ability to create a better future.
It's been great exploring all of this with you, and I encourage everyone to keep learning, keep having these important conversations, and keep taking action however you can.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Remember, the world is complicated, but it's not hopeless. There's always something we can do, even if it's just starting a conversation, asking a question, or sharing a story. Because in the end, it's our stories, our connections, and our shared humanity that will guide us toward a brighter future.